Good morning, everybody. Good morning.
Happy Sunday. Let us prepare our heart in heaven. Let's sing a song, Holy Song 42. All the lands that I loved. All the land that I loved.
I have been wandering all over this world, looking for something I just couldn't find. Seems like I'm moving in search of myself. Where will I find my peace of mind? All the lands that I love, all the seas that I said, miles and years roll by me. It's been such a lonely trail. Finally a welcome bell ring in my soul. Find it in this city of gold. People so friendly, I know I will be. My heart's pouring open, please take it from me. All the lands that I love, all the seas that I
Next song is 201. We are the story to tell to the nations. 201.
We have a story to tell to the nations. 201. Here we go. We've a story to tell to the nations that shall turn their hearts to the right. A story of truth and mercy, a story of peace and light, a story of peace and light. For the darkness shall turn to the dawning, and the dawning to noonday bright. And Christ's great kingdom shall come to earth, the kingdom of love and light. A song to be sung to the nations, that the Lord will reign in the world. A song that shall conquer evil and shatter the spear and sword, and shatter the spear and sword. For the darkness shall turn to the dawning, and the dawning to noonday bright. And Christ's great kingdom shall come. message to give to the nations, that the Lord who reigneth above hath sent us his Son to save us and show us that God is love, and show us that God is love. For the darkness shall turn to the dawning, and the dawning to noonday bright, and Christ's great kingdom shall come to earth, the kingdom of love and light. We've a Savior to show to the nations, who the path of sorrow hath trod, that all of the world's great peoples might come to the truth of God, might come to the truth of God. For the darkness shall turn to the dawning, and the dawning to noonday bright, and Christ's great kingdom shall come to earth, the kingdom of love and light.
Thank you. Next song, 57, Christ is here. 57, Christ is here.
Okay. I want to sing hallelujah. I want to sing hallelujah. Christ is here, Christ is here. I want to sing hallelujah. I want to sing hallelujah. Christ is here, Christ is here. I saw him in ashes down long narrow streets, down paths paved with sorrow, but searching in sorrow I found him in joy. Hallelujah. I want to sing hallelujah. I want to sing hallelujah. Christ is here, Christ is here. I want to sing hallelujah. I want to sing hallelujah. Christ is here, Christ is here. How many have fasted and prayed for this hour, but we have the blessing of serving our Father through loving his Son. Hallelujah. I want to sing hallelujah. I want to sing hallelujah. Christ is here, Christ is here. I want to sing hallelujah. I want to sing hallelujah. Christ is here, Christ is here. Lord, we are not worthy, we are not complete, and yet we were chosen. How gladly I'll give him my heart, hands, and voice. Hallelujah. I want to sing hallelujah. I want to sing hallelujah. Christ is here, Christ is here. I want to sing hallelujah. I want to sing hallelujah. Christ is here, Christ is here.
Sunday morning, October 1st, 2017. Holy calendar, 8th year, August 12. Let us bow to God and true parents. 경배. 바로 Join me prayer. 살아계 하시는 하나님 아버지 참부모님 안녕하십니까? Most lovely heavenly parents, God, true parents, good morning. We are so grateful to receive new day and new week, heavenly parents. Last week was so incredible warmth and impact day. So grateful the warmness you gave us, and I feel the impact, the joy in the heavenly kingdom through the cosmic level of the true parent blessing and new king reborn, and we are so grateful. Now the true mother is in this earth, is standing with three kingship. We are grateful this day we can see. This is not dream, this is substantial. Now through the kingdom of heaven, 정일국, the constitution, through that we can create the nation, your nation, heavenly parents. Heavenly parents, God and true parents worked hard through tear and sweat, and blood was sweat for the all humanity in the spiritual world and the physical world. We are celebrating the deep heart, and also we return to your love and your heart. We have become the not often children, now that the returned children, to truly we are grateful and thank you to you. Thank you, true parents. Spirit of your heart and love, we receive the forgiveness and mercy so that we can forgive the past and new begin with your providence. We reborn to your love, heavenly parents, God and true parents. Please bless this time that your providence moving on to truly blossom. But we know that in the Middle East difficulty, in the like Puerto Rico, the hurricane was hit, and many people, it's very difficult circumstances, even dying. We have to quickly give this good news to everyone, and then people can recognize our true parents in this earth, and your kingdom is spreading. Quickly, we have to tell new providence begun. Please guide this time that our pastor can giving inspiration, your heart and love and your word, and we can well receive and practice, and we can bring people in to our realm, heavenly parents. Please bless this day and this time. We ask you the heavenly blessing. I report in the name of Raman and Tamik Montanaro, blessed central family. Aju. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you very much. Please welcome our Pastor Montanaro.
Oma's birthday today. Happy birthday.
Happy birthday, Oma!
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Oma. Happy birthday to you.
So much, everyone.
She's 29. It's amazing. Okay, today, kind of a two-part sermon, and we'll see how they connect. I prayed, and God showed me a reading that I think is very appropriate for our circumstances right now. Page 39 in Father's autobiography. Let's all turn to page 39. If you have an autobiography, or you can share it with someone and read along. Well, actually 38. We'll start on page 38. This is Reverend Moon's autobiography as a peace-loving global citizen, and I'll put the link on the website. We'll start at the bottom of page 38. This is all for all of us. We moved to Maine recently, and we are living on a farm here in mid-coast Maine, and the work of the farm is never-ending. It never ends, and this, I think, is a very appropriate reading for us at this time, and I hope you all can listen well. Children these days are raised in urban areas and don't have opportunities to become familiar with nature. But developing sensitivity to nature is actually more important than developing our knowledge. What is the purpose of providing a university education to a child who cannot feel nature in his bosom and whose sensitivities are dull? The person separated from nature can gather book knowledge here and there, and then easily become an individualistic person who worships material goods. We need to feel the difference between the sound of spring rain falling, like a soft whisper, and that of the autumn rain, with pops and crackles. It is only the person who enjoys resonance with nature who can be said to have a true character. A dandelion blooming by the side of the road is more precious than all the gold in the world. We need to have a heart that knows how to love nature and love people. Anyone who cannot love nature or love people is not capable of loving God. Everything in creation embodies God at the level of symbol, and human beings are substantial beings created in the image of God. Only a person who can love nature can love God. I did not spend all my time roaming the hills and meadows and playing. I also worked hard helping my older brother run the farm. On a farm, there are many tasks that must be done during a particular season. The rice paddies and fields need to be plowed. Rice seedlings need to be transplanted, and weeds need to be pulled. When one is pulling weeds, the most difficult task is to weed a field of millet. After the seeds are planted, the furrows need to be weeded at least 3 times. And this is back-breaking work. When we were finished, we couldn't straighten our backs for a while. Sweet potatoes don't taste very good if they are planted in clay. They need to be planted in a mixture of 1/3 clay and 2/3 sand if they're going to produce the best tasting sweet potatoes. For corn, human excrement was the best fertilizer. So I would take my hands and break up all the solid excrement into small pieces. By helping out on the farm, I learned what was needed to make beans grow well, what kind of soil was best for soybeans, and what soil was best for red beans. I am a farmer's farmer. We'll stop there. So, reading Father's words, we see that he lived in very much in harmony with nature for the first, I would say, 15 years of his life. He was a farmer's son, and he grew up in a farming area of North Korea, what is now North Korea, and he gained a lot of his wisdom from communicating with nature. And he, in an earlier part of that chapter, he talked about how when he was in prison, the reason he did not lose hope was he could hear the wind blowing through the trees, and he could even see the insects crawling and even talk to the insects. Sometimes when he was in a slave labor camp, he said there were lice on everybody. Everyone had lice on their bodies, but he would make friends with the lice and talk to them. And that was his companion. So the thing about Father we have to understand is that he wasn't just talking about theology all the time. Although he became a master of theology and teaching about God and about the principle, his heart was always wanting to be in nature. And even at the end of his life, he would love nowhere better than to go in the ocean and fish and pray the entire day from morning until night. No matter what the weather, stormy or windy or clear, he would be out there getting sunburned. Everyone else was exhausted, but he would keep pushing. He loved nature and he loved to connect to nature. What I wanted to talk about today was also connected to what Oma prayed about. It's a very complicated topic. Has anyone heard of original sin? Have you heard of original sin? Yes? What is original sin? Jesus never spoke about original sin. There's not one word in the Bible where Jesus talks about original sin. So the idea, the concept of original sin came up later, actually, more with Augustine and other Christian theologians who wanted to understand sin, and they categorized it and they broke it into little pieces and all this stuff. And then, of course, they said Jesus was born without original sin. And they connected that to the idea that he was born without a father, that he didn't inherit the seed of sin from a father, that his father was actually God, that God impregnated his mother. And this miraculous birth, this sexless birth, was believed and still is believed by faithful Christians throughout the world. The principle says that no one can be born without a man and a woman's seed, an egg. That's the core of God's creation. God created it with that law. He didn't break that law when he let Jesus come to existence. Maybe it's too controversial to talk about that right now, but if you read the book of Luke and the book of Matthew and Mark and look at the early story of Jesus' life, Mary gets the revelation that she is to be with child from the angel. I think Gabriel was the one who brought her the message. And she goes at that point to her cousin's home, Elizabeth, who's John the Baptist's mother. And John the Baptist is not born yet. He's 6 months in the womb. Elizabeth is 6 months pregnant. And Zechariah is the chief priest, and he is Elizabeth's wife. So John was born in the chief priest's family. But Jesus is the cousin through their mothers. The mothers are cousins, Elizabeth and Mary. And Mary stays there for 3 months in the chief priest's house. And she comes out 3 months later, and no one knows why, because actually she was 3 months pregnant when she comes out of the house. And clearly, Elizabeth had recognized this, blessed is the fruit of your womb, she says. There's the Magnificat, I think it's called in the Catholic Church, the speech that Elizabeth gives when she sees Mary. She knows that this child is going to be the Messiah. Her child was supposed to make way for the Messiah, make straight the way of the Messiah. But Mary's child is the Messiah. So whose child is going to be higher? Mary's child or Elizabeth's child? Whose child is going to be more important? Mary's child. And Elizabeth realizes this. And we don't have any evidence or anything like this, but we do know that 3 months later, Mary leaves the house of Zechariah and Elizabeth and goes home to her hometown, Bethlehem. Or actually Nazareth. She was Nazarene. Nazareth. And she begs Joseph, who was her fiancé, to marry her. And Joseph refuses at first, because she's pregnant. And he's like, well, who did you fool around with? He didn't want to marry her. It's understandable. Most men would feel similar feelings. But then the angel comes to Joseph and says, the child is of God, marry her. Because if he hadn't married her, what would have happened to Mary? According to Jewish law, what would have happened to Mary? She would have been stoned to death as an adulteress. She would have been stoned to death. Stones would have been picked up and thrown at her until her head was destroyed and she died. And the baby died within her. Now you have to ask the question, why would Zechariah and Elizabeth, who knew that Mary was pregnant with the Messiah, let her go to a situation where her life was in danger and the Messiah's life was in danger? You've got to read between the lines on this one. But what you can see clearly is that Elizabeth goes into Zachariah's house, and 3 months later she comes out 3 months pregnant. Sorry, Mary goes into Zachariah's house and comes out later, 3 months later, 3 months pregnant. And then Elizabeth lets her go to really her doom. Maybe some jealousy going on there. And maybe that means that Jesus' father, you have to do the math yourself. But anyway, this idea of original sin was created by Augustine and other theologians, talking about Adam and Eve's sin. But we know from the principle that Father revealed that the original sin was a sexual relationship between Adam and Eve and Lucifer, the angel who tempted Eve. We know this. And the fruit was a symbol of their love. Okay, let's go to the point I'm trying to make. All these words about sin don't understand one thing. When the Messiah comes, he comes as a man born on the earth to cleanse sin. He is born in a sinful environment with sinful parents, right? No Christian would say that Mary and Joseph or Zachariah or anyone was sinless. Jesus is the first and only sinless man according to Christian theology. But the point is that Jesus had to inherit all that sin in order to cleanse it. We all inherit that sin too. So what's the difference? The difference is only that the Messiah inherits that sin and is strong enough because of the foundation that God gave him at birth. He's got a strong, strong character and connection to God more than most people, more than any other person. And he can take on that relationship that we have with Satan and change it and make it good and make it right. Fix it. Do you think God wants to throw Satan into the trash heap of history? You think God is going to destroy Satan? Satan is the reason why all of us are suffering. The original sin, right? So why didn't God just destroy him? He could do it anytime he wants to, right? Because Satan and Lucifer and that relationship with Adam and Eve is a complicated mistake that all three are responsible for. And we are all now responsible for. We all inherit sin from our parents, from our ancestors, from our society, from television, from movies we watch, from music we listen to, from friends we talk to in high school and college and places in our lives. Every relationship has a mixture of good and evil, sin, selfishness, and kindness, unselfishness, goodness, because we still have our original mind, original nature. We all inherit sin. The Messiah is no different. He inherits sin. But he is different in the sense that from birth, he is chosen, prepared by his lineage, by his ancestry, to be as pure as possible, as good as possible, as strong as possible, to be in the right nation. The nation that the Messiah comes to, is that an ordinary nation? Was Jesus born in an ordinary nation? The Bible, this is the Korean English Bible, but the Bible, 90%, 80% of it is the Old Testament, the Jewish Bible, talking about the difficulties that the Jewish people were put through by God to make them a chosen people. The Jewish people have suffered so much in history because God wanted them to be pure. People who have suffered, sometimes they can become bitter, but also they can become purified by suffering. Have you ever met anyone who suffered a lot? And some of us here have suffered a lot, right? The suffering can make you bitter, or it can make you pure. It purifies you. It's like the fire that burns the gold ore and burns away the dirt and leaves just the gold behind. There's one couple that I really love and admire, Nam Hee Wang and Jenny Ang. They are a second generation couple. And Nami was caught in a tragic accident in Texas. He was a passenger, and they were on the highway, the freeway, and they were in a fundraising team. And a Russian brother was driving, and there were several second gen, first gen in the car fundraising together. And a Jeep on the other side, the guy lost control of his vehicle, and it went over the median and it flipped through the air and landed right in their windshield. Both of them going like 60 miles an hour. So 120 miles an hour, two cars came together. I think the Russian brother was killed almost instantly. Reverend Lee's son was killed instantly. And Namhi was crippled. He still walks like this with a cane. And his best friend was killed. Jenny Ang's brother David died in a car accident also when she was young. And she suffered a lot losing her brother. But you will never see a more beautiful couple than this couple. They're so sensitive and gentle and kind and patient that when they love each other, there's no complaint between them. They are embracing of every person. They listen to people well. They're kind. Their suffering made them both really deep people. Because I don't know, you can maybe analyze it yourself if you want to, why suffering does this. But suffering maybe makes us realize how grateful we are for anyone's love. If anyone is loving or kind, we're grateful. We see any goodness, we're grateful. Because we realize how painful life can be. And you realize that maybe also there's a measure of guilt in it too. Like you realize you're still alive, but other people have died, have gone suffered even more than you. And you have an empathy then. Right? So suffering leads to purity sometimes of heart. The chosen people were chosen to suffer. That's a great line, right? In Fiddler on the Roof. Tevye is looking up at the sky. He always looks at God like this. He always talks to the sky. He goes, I know we're the chosen people, but once in a while, couldn't you choose somebody else? Great line, you know. Once in a while, couldn't you choose somebody else? You know, people think the chosen people, ooh, we're chosen. You're chosen to suffer. You're chosen to go through a course of suffering to purify your heart. So Jesus was born in a nation that had gone through 2,000 years of suffering from the time of Abraham. And then he was born, not just in that nation, but to a lineage in that nation that had probably suffered more than the other lineages, that had been purified by suffering more than even the other families. It was very pure-hearted. And then he was born in a family, a woman, Mary, that was willing to die to give birth to the Messiah. Because she knew that what she was doing by going in the house of Zechariah and getting pregnant was risking her life. Zechariah should have married her. Zechariah should have married her. Because by Jewish law, he could have a second wife. Just as Jacob had Rachel and Leah and the two handmaidens, Jewish law allowed the chief priest, he didn't have a son yet. Elizabeth was pregnant, but he didn't have a son yet. They didn't know what it was to be a boy or a girl. So he's allowed to take a second wife, and he could have protected Mary that way. Marrying Mary, marrying Elizabeth, raising John and Jesus together as brothers in the same home. That was what God wanted. But instead he just stands by while his wife, jealous, kicks out Mary and lets her die? You fool. But that family, think of Mary's sacrifice. Yeah, this is a good family. So you think of all the people, all the nations, God chose the most pure nation that had suffered the most, that he had guided through suffering. And then the most pure lineage, and then the most pure family, and the most pure woman in that family, and the most pure man. And he put them together to create a child, and that child even suffered. Herod tried to kill all the children, right? And Mary had to take Jesus at 2 years of age, flee to Egypt. Actually, as an infant, and flee to Egypt, came back when he was 2. That was not an easy journey for Mary to take. That's more suffering. And his childhood was suffering. We can't go into great detail about Jesus' life, because we don't know many things. But we do know that at 12 years old, his family goes to Jerusalem for the annual offering of sacrifices, probably at Passover. And Mary and Joseph and their other children, Jesus had brothers and sisters, The others have left Jerusalem, and 3 days later they realize that Jesus is not with them. Oh, where's Jesus? He's 12 years old. And they go back to Jerusalem. They're looking all over for him. They finally look in the temple, and he's teaching in the temple. And all the rabbis are gathered around, shocked at the wisdom of this child. And Mary comes up and Joseph, and they scold him. Where were you? We were looking all over for you. 3 days late. What kind of parent leaves their child for 3 days and doesn't know? Oh, we forgot Sungnam. Oh, yeah, that was 3 days ago. I wonder where he is. Let's go back and find him. And then he scolds his parents. He says, did you not know I would be in my Father's house? There's depth in those words. But his childhood was not happy. So suffering purifies. Jesus was probably the most suffering person on earth. Because of that, his heart was pure. And he could fight against evil. And he overcame Satan. The most classic example is in the wilderness, right? When he has a 40-day prayer and fast. And at the end of that, Satan comes and tempts him 3 times. And he overcomes Satan using God's word. Satan tried to tempt Jesus. He wasn't some perfect man who could not sin. He could sin. He could fall. That's why Satan wanted to tempt him. But he overcame Satan. That's why he's victorious. That's why we can learn from Jesus. Not because he was born without original sin and no father and like some God on earth. What good does that do me? I cannot become him ever. I can never do what he did. But if he's a man like any one of us, born in a most suffering family, overcoming Satan by the power of his heart and will and love for God, then yes, I can learn from him. And yes, I have to learn from him. And yes, his example means something to me. And I can have courage, take courage from that example. That's what the Messiah is. Father was no different. Father's life, even though he was born in a beautiful family, and that's what I'm trying to say, is that beautiful family had suffered so much. He talks about it in the earlier part of the book. Japan had occupied North Korea. First of all, the Koreans have a 4,300-year history where they've been invaded 800 times by China and Japan and Russia and every other country, trying to use that peninsula as a land bridge to attack each other. They take over Korea, and then they use it as a bridge to attack Japan, or Japan uses it as a bridge to attack China and Russia. And back and forth, these armies have gone through Korea. But the Koreans have never, ever aggressed on another country. Their nation was very pure-hearted. They loved to wear white. They fight with each other, but then they can forgive each other right afterwards. I've seen it. I lived in Korea for 3 years. I was impressed by the Korean character. Very strong, stubborn. If you ever know any Koreans, they're incredibly stubborn. But they're big hearts, and when you really are suffering, Koreans don't run away. They come closer to you. When you're crying or suffering, they come closer to you, and they want to help you out. They want to be there. And they don't make fun of you or anything like that. And that's because of their nation's history. And Father was born in that nation. And then for 40 years they were occupied by Japan. Their language was wiped out. Japan refused to let anyone speak Korean. You had to speak Japanese in school, and if you were caught speaking Korean, you could be punished. You could not study the Korean alphabet. They burned, especially, and then Father's family, in the middle of that occupation, which went from 1905 to 1945, the end of World War II. Father was born in 1920, 15 years after the occupation started. And 1930, when he was 10 years old, in the middle of the worst part of the occupation, when the Japanese were especially hating Christians. Why would they hate Christians the most? More than the Confucians and the Buddhists.
They wouldn't bow down to the emperor?
They would not bow down to the emperor. Shinto worship requires that you bow down to the emperor of Japan as the descendant of God. But the Christians especially, thou shalt have no other gods before me, right? They would not bow down. Also, Christianity was the Western religion. So the Japanese had a special hatred for it because they themselves had Confucianism and Buddhism, but they didn't believe in Christianity. So for many reasons, they hated the Christians. And Father's family converted and became Christian in that environment. I can understand you keeping your faith, but we're converting to Christianity from Buddhism in the middle of persecution. Obviously, amazingly pure-hearted family. So his family was especially prepared. And there's many stories of his lineage, of his ancestors sacrificing for the nation and doing many things, giving up, taking all their family money and giving it to the resistance movement against Japan. Father's uncle was hated by his family for years because they thought he gambled away all the family fortune. And later on they found out he had taken all the money and he gave it to the resistance movement in Manchuria. And he was hated by his family until he died. And he gave every penny of his family's fortune to the resistance movement. And later on, he was recognized as a patriot by Korea after his death. This is the lineage that Father came from. Patriots and Christians and strong people who really love God and love the nation. And Father was born in a special family, and even at his family, he was considered remarkable at birth. He had a wisdom that when he understood something, he wouldn't change his mind. And if he went against it, he would just cry. And even 3, 4 years old, 5 years old, he would just cry until, you did what he thought was right. And if you didn't do it, all those bad things would happen. He was like, he had a sense of what was right from a young age. So he's a special person. But was he sinless? He inherited the same sin we all inherit. But he overcame it. He was given a great blessing. Have a good family, a good lineage, a good nation that had suffered to become good. But he was given that blessing that made him strong. Strong enough to fight Satan like Jesus did and overcome Satan like Jesus did. But he was no different from us. And he felt to the end of his life that he was a sinner. If you read his prayers, if you read his speeches, you realize he's not bragging about himself like I'm so special. He talks about himself like a sinner. He weeps when he talks to God. He talks about God, he says, God, forgive this miserable son. But he knows he's God's son. But he knows he feels the burden of sin. My brother's here, Joven, and he's not in the room right now, but he's here on our land. And Joven and I suffered a divorce when we were young. My father and mother divorced. I was 5 and a half, almost 6. Joven was 7. And it really hurt us so badly. I can't remember anything for a year and a half, actually, after my parents' divorce. It was just, I blanked it out. I have no memory. I finally got it back again later through a lot of prayer and crying and stuff like this. I understood what happened. But I had blocked it out. Joven, the older brother, suffered more than me. He suffered so much. When he was 9 years old, we were in New York City. He was already outside on the streets smoking and kind of hanging out with the tough kids on the street. At one point, he was brought in by 2 kids into our apartment, and his arm was broken because the firemen, they open up the fire hydrants in New York City, and the jets of water come out in the summer so the kids can play in it. But they're really powerful. They're so powerful. And Joven was 9 years old, and they threw him. Some kid had thrown him into the water jet, and he was tumbled in the street, and he broke his arm. He's 9 years old on the streets of New York. I was home safe with my mother, learning how to cook. Or, reading books, doing well in school. That was my escape, But Joven suffered. He went out, he was challenging himself to understand what life meant and that kind of thing. He ran away from home when he was 15. I stayed in school. I was the valedictorian of my class. I was a good student, president, all that other good stuff. And Joven was out feeding himself, working at 15 years old. He cut off the tip of his thumb in a factory in Connecticut. He lied about his age to get the job. So his life was difficult. When I heard principle, and I studied about Jacob and Esau, how Esau was angry and wanted to kill Jacob, and Jacob was kind of proud of himself, and he was also at home cooking and learning how to cook, and then he was the younger brother, Abel position, and Esau was in Cain's older brother position. I felt that I wept. I felt that was me and Joven. And I felt that through his suffering, I was given a chance to hear principle, to understand who God was better, to understand something. But his suffering taught me what not to do. I went a different way because of him. I was given grace because of him. How could I just forget him? You see, we're all tied together by sin. And the Messiah is the Abel of Abels. He is the King of Abels. So he feels the most indebted. He realized that everyone else suffered so he could be born. Do you understand? You think Jesus didn't know the suffering that his ancestors had gone through so he could be born? You think he didn't feel that burden? You think Father didn't feel that burden? The burden that 3,000 people in Korea had stood up to fight the Japanese with no weapons, just signs saying, we want our country back. And they were killed on March 1st, 1919, just a month before he was conceived. You don't think he felt the burden of those 3,000 lives? And the burden of World War I, which was fought so that Christian nations could be prepared to receive the Messiah. And the burden of World War II, which was fought so they could receive the Messiah's mission. World War I and World War II were fought, millions of people dying, so that the Messiah could succeed. Father felt that burden every day, every minute. So don't talk to me about original sin and burdens. We all have burdens of sin. There's no excuse. We have to have the courage to fight sin and overcome it every day and not get burdened by it, not feel like, oh, I'm a miserable sinner. You're God's son, you're God's daughter. Yes, you're a mess. Yes, you have mistakes and you have bad character and you have mistakes in your lineage. Yes, you have stuff to clean up. Get to work. Get to work. And don't push yourself so hard that you destroy yourself either. That's not going to help God. If you're a mess, if you destroy yourself. Feel God's love. Then with deep heart and repent. That's why arrogance is so bad. It's so bad to be arrogant. Why we need a humble heart. With a humble, repentful heart, you say, yes, Father, I'm your son. But I know I have so much sin. And I have to clean it up. Please guide me today so I can do my best to clean up that sin. And you make one step every day forward. Every day you make one step to clean up your sin and to make the world a better place. That's all. That's all you can do. That's what the Messiah did. He took on the sin of all of history. He felt that all of history had suffered so he could be born. So he could fight Satan and clean it up on behalf of all mankind. So we should stop this stupid argument about original sin. The Messiah comes and inherits so much pain and suffering. And he takes it all on and he fights and he wins and he gives love. He changes suffering to love. He changes sin to love. And that's the legacy of the Messiah. That's the legacy of Jesus. That's the legacy of Reverend Moon. And that should be each one of our legacies in our life. Are you ready to do that? Are you ready to do that? To take on that sin that you've inherited and transform it with your love into something beautiful, a beautiful life? Yes? Raise your hands if you say you're ready to do that.
Yes.
Raise your hand. Both hands. Both hands. Okay. All right. Thank you. Let's pray. Father, thank you so much for your love and for the words, for the example of our true parents, for the example of Jesus, and for the example of all of Hyungjin, all the children, all your children, all the blessed couples, all the brothers and sisters, all the saints of history. Thank you so much for the examples that have gone before us, good people. And now it comes to us to make an example for our children, to make an example for the world around us. Let us make a good example. Someone who's not arrogant, someone who's humble and realizes how much sin they have, but at the same time courageously takes on that sin and turns it into love. I pray, and that's why forgiveness is also important. How can I judge someone else? How can I hate someone else if I have sinned? How can I be proud for who I am and what I am if I have sinned? But even if I have sinned, I can also have love. And I can be a loving, good person. And I can make a good example. And I can make the world a better place.
And there's no room in that for arrogance, and there's no room in that for judgment. There's only room for forgiveness and love and hard work and sacrifice and tears and embrace and unity. I pray that each one of us can understand the example of Jesus and the example of true Father and put those examples to practice in our lives. And I ask your blessing on this day, and we offer everything to you. I'm grateful for this week. We offer everything in the name of Raman and Tamiko Matanar, our blessed central family. Aju. Amen. Please take a minute and just pray on your own.
I want to sing hallelujah. I want to sing hallelujah. Christ is here, Christ is here. Here. I want to sing hallelujah. I want to sing hallelujah. Christ is here, Christ is here. Here. Thank you, everybody. Have a great week.
Thank you.